Hello everyone, welcome to this second episode in English of GemRuby show. Today we have Vladimir with us. Hello Vladimir, how are you?
Hi everyone. Uh, I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very nice to be here.
It's a great honor to have you today. Even if I think many Rubyists already know you, to be honest, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're working at, and what you're working on currently?
Sure. So my name is Vladimir Dementyev. Uh, I'm a principal backend engineer at Evil Martians, consultancy agency focused on product development for developer tools companies, startups, and so on. And I'm personally mostly responsible for our team growth and some particular performance related usually projects, and it's also open source development. First of all, AnyCable,
Okay,
the project of mine, and the product of Evil Martians, and many other jams, like for example TaskPro or ActionPolicy, to name a few, the most popular, I think, the most known.
thanks a lot, Vlad, to be here today. I want to talk also about your news. You have recently published a book, right? Layered Design for Ruby on Rails application. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We just, well, as we're recording this episode, it's still gonna be in a day available in public. But yeah, it just has been released, and that's also something I worked on in the recent year. So
Okay. I've seen your Rails conf about layered architecture, and I was like, I need to grab this book for sure. Where can we find it?
yeah, the book is available. I think the easiest way is to order it at Amazon, so Kindle
Okay.
version, PDF, or even print version. And it's also available
Okay.
at fab.com. But I think they use a subscription model for reading their books, so I would go with Amazon actually. Oh, if you don't like Amazon for, yeah, there are plenty of reasons to don't like Amazon. So then you should go for Pact, and I think it's going to be available at other platforms, like online platforms like Aurelia and stuff, a bit later. So
Okay.
included in their subscription bundles.
Okay. Okay. Great. Today, Vlad, we will also talk about authorization in our Ruby app, not only our Rails app, actually. And thanks to one of the gyms you have developed, ActionPolicy, which is a great name. And before to begin with my question, I would like to ask you, please tell us the difference between action and active in our Rails application.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's. I think I should first of all mention that at the same RailsConf you already mentioned my talk, and there was a keynote by Aileen Chutel, which
Mm-mm.
included the answer to this question. Actually, I think that's the
Okay.
first, at least in the recent years, official, we would say, because Aileen is a member of the core team, answered to the question why how we choose between action and active. The funny thing, when I saw it live, I was kind of surprised and amazed because I had the same uh, kind of thing included into my book, because I also discussed this section with active, and the definitions kind of matched, likely. So my perception of action versus any active is similar to the Rails core perception. So the idea
Okay.
here, back to the question, that active, we use active prefix for everything related to the model layer, to the domain
Hmm.
model of the application, I would say, within internal business logic. And action is something related to user interactions in general, or handling external events. So it's kind of inbound layer of the application, as I call it in the book. And that's how we
Okay.
differentiate between action and active. So something related to user interactions or something related to domain model.
Action is user interaction, active is domain model. Okay, thank you Thank you. Maybe I will have the opportunity to have Ili in another podcast to ask her and to talk about that also. But thank you.
Yeah,
I
that would be
wanted to know the
great
difference.
to spend more time discussing this terminology. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's really
totally, totally, totally. Now let's dive into the concrete, if I might say. For authorization, Rubyist might know about Pundit or CanCan, but you have decided to code something else. What was missing from other solutions that brings you to create something new?
yeah. That's. I like how you formulate the question because that's a really good question. What we already had can, and we had a
Okay.
Pandit, and kind of they kind of different, but they covered all the use cases, kind of
Mhm.
right. Still, they're the most popular options for reviews. But I decided to throw something new and
Okay.
announced a published action policy. So the original motivation for that was to kind of aggregate all the possible additions I made for years to different projects using Pandit. So for many years, uh, before Evil Martians and when I started working at Evil Martians, our primary authorization framework, library,
Yeah.
I would say not framework actually, it's just library, was Pandit because we kind of knew that can, uh, well, it just didn't feel right, didn't scale well for larger applications when you have larger ability files and so on. So I know some
Okay.
people stick to can even for larger applications, and they kind of try to hack around to make it maintainable. But my belief is that it's very difficult to do that. It's better to use another tool. And Planet was perfect for that because it's simple. It's just use kind of pure Ruby objects for
Hmm.
implementing policy and so on. But that simplicity also meant that when you need to add more functionality into your authorization layer, you need to
Yeah.
write your custom code on top of Bandit every time. And I had a collection of extensions for Bandit. I just copy pasted from project to project.
Okay.
Uh, and they kind of evolved with every project. They were every time they were like a bit different, right? Because I copied one stage, just added something new, and so on and so on. And I realized
Mhm.
that it would be beneficial to extract all the modifications and
Okay.
kind of re-implement Bandit with this idea in mind, with the focus on flexibility, performance, and other stuff. And that's how
Okay.
Action Policy was born.
There were Pundit, which was really simple, a power, something that which was really flexible, and CanCan, which was much more that like a framework, but sometimes you have to hack it. So you decided to maybe do something which combine both and more scalable.
Yeah, so that's true that Action Policy it's based on Pandit. It's mostly like Pandit, and
Mhm.
we even have a migration guide and compatibility mode to easily switch from Pandit to Action Policy. But it also grabbed some ideas, mostly like simplification ideas from CanCan. So
Okay.
some conventions, I would say. Uh, but yeah, it also included many things that not covered by neither of those. So like we
Okay.
have
Yeah.
extensive caching mechanism, uh, testing utilities, which is most important, I think, and debugging tools and so on included to the framework.
Okay.
So it's not just a combination of two; it's combination plus many features on top of it.
Yeah, yeah. This is not the addition of the two gyms, but you have built something that is more scalable on each part that we could think of. Okay, okay, understood. That brings me to my next question, and you might already answer it, but when you have developed this gym, what makes you feel that it should be extracted as a gem? And this is because, as you said, you felt this can be used by other people because you used it many times and already copy pasted from project to project with Pendit at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's kind of the main reason why I decided to go with the gem. And there is
Okay.
also, so we here should separate like the kind of the reasoning behind extracting a gem and the actual motivation when I finally decided, okay, it's time to do that. And that leads us back to RailsConf topic and action versus any. Sorry, action versus active. Yeah, I usually answer questions regarding action versus any. But, so the actual extraction happened in 2018
Okay.
when I first had to present a talk at RailsConf. So my first RailsConf talk was in 2018, and it was about action policy. And the name of the talk, so basically the idea of the talk was built around the jam and the editions I made. And the title of the talk is Action Policy: The Missing Guide to Authorization in Rails. So I built action policy with the idea in mind that it could be eventually, maybe someday, be a part of Rails to fulfill
Okay.
this need of having something for authorization. That's why the title is Action Policy. And that's actually the first time in my life I asked myself this question, whether I should use active or action, right? Because I was like, should it be active policy or action policy? And then I thought, okay, it deals with, it's actually integrated into action controller and deals with user because it always has a context, organization context. It's usually user. Okay, probably should be action, and that title, I think that's how it would be called. Would have been called if it was a part of Rails. So,
Okay.
and that's what finally kicked me, kind of pushed me to extract this jam, to open source it, to form it, to shape it up. Because previously, as I said, it was a bunch of extensions, and then I started thinking of the title, of the documentation, and all the tooling around it. So,
Mhm.
besides from extracting something that I can reuse in my projects and everyone else can reuse, I also wanted to make a kind of I'm a conference driven development, so I needed some external motivation to finally extract it.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I needed, maybe I just needed some stage to present it. I don't know. So anyway, that happens. I think if I wasn't accepted, for example, for my talk wasn't accepted, has been accepted, I would eventually extract the project, probably under different name. By the way, I
Okay.
had some other working titles for it before I started preparing for RailsConf, but that could take more time, and it could be much harder to get traction for it without having an ability to talk about the jam, the idea behind it, the whole topic at a large conference.
Yeah.
That's probably, again, I'm too fast in it. That's one of the next questions you wanted to ask, right? About the challenges. So I'm already answering. Sorry.
No
So yeah.
problem, no problem. Behind this name, it was actually a good question. The question we've asked at the beginning, that behind this name and behind this gym, all this work, there is also the you wanted to make it a part of race and just and only not only a gem out of there, but to be able to have something like we love in Rails, convention over configuration. So we have something that everybody can use just to be able to use it everywhere. Okay, I understand. Another question came to my mind. So you talked about caches, scopes that are not in another gym. It makes me think about what was the most challenging part, technically speaking, in this gym.
Oh, that's a good question. I think the most challenging part is still there. I'm still kind of working on the first major release because I want to revisit some original design ideas. But um, I think the most challenging part, yeah, the caching part of the gem. We have multiple layers of caching, like
Hmm.
instance level cache, thread level cache, distributed cache. It's it was that's the part that was tested in production. It was extracted from production, so we knew that it worked. But it's hard to generalize it, to make it
Yeah.
flexible and extensible. And we still see some use cases when it doesn't work and it shouldn't be enabled probably by default. So it's still kind of questionable. We we kind of solve it by having a good, I think, pretty decent documentation explaining how it works and why it works this way. So I think it
Okay.
helps to decide whether to use it or not. But it's where we we make kind of a step from being as simple and easier to use as Rails to something more advanced.
Hmm.
And there is no kind of middle ground. It's either so most parts of the action policy are that simple, and there are some parts that are quite complex and they require some deeper understanding right away. But that's the trade-off because we want it to be usable by larger applications which suffer from performance issues related to authorization, which is quite common actually. And
Okay.
that's we just provide this tooling, and yeah, that requires some knowledge. So it's kind of a non-uniform distribution of the like non-uniform level of knowledge required to use the gem. You can quickly start, but maybe that's the same with Rails actually. If you really want to employ Rails, and especially its most kind of a significant part, active record, you actually need to know how it works. At some point,
Hmm.
you just have to learn about it, not just use it as APIs or whatever. At some point, you need to start thinking about how it's work under the hood and to provide like better experience for your customers. And the same thing
Yeah.
is with action policy, I think. But yeah, the caching part is the challenging. Not the challenging part, actually. So that's kind of a paradoxical thing. I built action policy with the idea in mind that it can be seen as a part of Rails, as a Rails sub framework, rather from the Rails
Okay.
framework, and it plays with Rails nicely. But at the same time, I made it
Yeah.
Rails agnostic. So technically, action policy has no dependencies, and it can be used with any Ruby framework, any Ruby application,
Yeah.
and that's intentional. I try to create every gem I work on as Rails agnostic because I believe that would just help to spread the idea, actually spread Rails ideas beyond Rails and to at the same time at one hand, and the other hand it would allow developers using other like web frameworks where I have plenty of uh, web libraries and frameworks out there, not maybe that large as Rails, but anyway, to also leverage
Yeah.
some tools that
Yeah.
use
Like
Rails.
Anami.
So yeah, like Hanami, Rhoda, or even plain Sinatra, you can use action
Yeah.
policy with Sinatra. Why not? Or if you're building some not even related to web stuff, maybe something
Yeah.
like this. Anyway, so there are like I know that there is a community maintained plugin for action policy for Grape framework for building APIs, for
Okay.
example, which is not Rails specific, and that's great. So the original idea actually clicked. It took years to finally see that people outside of Rails, maybe they also using Rails with it, but it's not directly connected to Rails, also use this
Yeah.
framework, and that's great. So but that introduced some burden for me as a maintainer to keep in mind that I'm not in the Rails context, but still I want to be like Rails. So yeah, the kind of duality uh, in the original design made it a bit harder to implement and maintain, but
Okay.
it's I think it's still worth it. So
Okay, so there is two things that are technically maybe difficult with maintaining this gym is the cache side, which is never um, easy to test and to implement because there is a lot of side effect, a lot of things that we cannot see before to cache the things and to use the application in production, or but also the fact that we want to maintain something that is race agnostic and be able to use it everywhere and in any framework that want to use Ruby and want to use authorization with ActionPolicy. Okay, really cool. And I think that it brings us to the next question, which is today: what is the most significant non-technical challenge with this gym policy today?
yeah, well, as we mentioned at the very beginning, there
Mhm.
were two gems to implement authorization in your application,
Yeah.
can and Pandit. And the most so for me the most non-technical challenge was to compete with this two good old gems that has been
Okay.
popular, has been known in the community. And when you have that strong presence of like tools that are used by everyone, like dozens of tutorials, videos, blog posts are written about them, right? And it's
Mhm.
hard to be a new kid on the block, you know. And
Yeah.
it's really kind of challenging because you see like every time people talk about authorization, go, oh yeah, you should go with Kafka and found it, yeah, yeah. And no one mentions your jam because okay, well, it's I can say that today uh, there are definitely users of Action Policy. I know many of them, and I see that it's getting it's appearing on the like discussions or whatever when people discuss authorization. But it's been 5 years since the jam was released, right? So it's not it's Action Policy is no longer the new one, right? The newest one
Okay.
probably. It's also kind of old, but the thing is the jam like Pandit and Kanagayan are also getting like they are about 10, 15 years old, I guess, both of them. So still they prevail in the world of authorization and Rails, and yeah, it's much harder to work in the high competitive, I would say, open source market. I can say it like that. Uh, Especially in the Ruby, where I think like given the Rails example, we can say that Ruby community is kind of conservative in terms of choosing tools. So
Okay.
we prefer tools that we used uh, like many years ago, if they are still maintained and they're still like being they being evolving, like Kankan and Pandit, they're still alive. They're introducing new features, changes, whatever. So yeah, that's the most challenging for anyone who tries to build something new in the world of Rails and Ruby, where there are already community approved solutions.
Challenging and competing with others that have already proven themselves is never easy. But it brings me to my last question for you today, and you will tell me maybe it is what you are the most proud of, and I ask you the question formally: what are you the most proud of today with this gem, especially?
Yeah, I think that's 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 the part I'm proud of. That's eventually uh, uh, the library got traction, and I know some larger
Mhm.
projects using it. I know some like I think I'm feeling proud of it when some engineers come to me at the conferences, for example, and say, "Oh, thank you for Action Policy. We just migrated to it, and we're feeling happy with it." So yeah, you just as with every other I think open source tool, most of them it
Mhm.
takes time, like really like 4 to 5 years. if you still continue improving it, if you work with your users, that's important, right? You need to react on feedback to stay kind of a lane for this, and eventually you get something back from them, and that makes you feel like that was the right decision to extract it, to publish it, to work on it, and to spend the spare time on continue maintaining it and improving. So
Yes.
yeah, so now like I think it happened to me like just about maybe a year ago, the first time, something like that, when some engineer, also podcast host, uh, Drew Bragg, approached me and said, "Hey,
Okay.
action policy is cool. We use it, and it's like really cool." And I thought, "Oh, really? You use an action policy? Wow!" Because that probably was the first time the person who I kind of also knew as a community leader approached me
Yeah.
and said, "Oh, we're using your tool, and it's cool." Oh, wow, really? Okay, then I continue. Then I need to work on it, and that's one of the best things in open source. You never know who's using, like, best and worst. You never know who's using your tool.
Yeah.
It's hard to know that, but at the moment when you realize that there are people around who probably getting a bit like, I don't know, technically happier using your tool than something else, so
Yes.
that makes them more productive, for example, solve their problems. That's kind of a what you get for developing in public, for developing something for not just yourself, and that's probably why I'm still
Yeah.
doing this, all of this.
Yeah. Not having the feedback of the community because it is open source and most of the users are silent. It's hard because you don't know who is using who, your your software, and you don't know if they like it or not. Even if they don't like it, there is some issues I guess on GitHub that pop to say, oh, it's it lacks that or that, but people that are happy are most of the time silent, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Thanks a lot, Vladimir, today to be here. I was thrilled to discuss with you about Ruby and your incredible work for the community. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas, for having me for the questions.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
it was my pleasure.
pleasure
To
to
be
talk
honest,
about it.
really.
Yeah, me too.
So if you like this podcast and you like the discussion we had today with Vladimir, go follow him on Twitter at Balkan_Tula. That's right. Is that right? I'm saying it right.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can follow me too at yet another dev all together. And if you want also to catch the next episode or the previous episode, you can follow. Thanks again, Vladimir. Thanks a lot to be here today, and maybe see you another time.
yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you, Vladimir. Goodbye.